So, hello.
Hello.
This is it. This is the first episode of Style Talks. And
I'm excited. Hopefully, many more to come.
Many more to come.
Many more to come.
So this, so this is me, and my name is Matthew Fall Mackenzie, and I'm an artist. And this is Gio.
I'm Gio Penichetti. Everyone's gonna listen to this probably knows us by now. I'm a writer, artist, gonzo philosopher, failed academic, you name it.
He's got that right from the Twitter bio description. And I'm Matthew. Obviously, I was the person who came up with the idea to do this, I suppose, because although we've been thinking about talking about art for a long time, and this podcast it's not really just a podcast. It's also going to be a kind of a vehicle for artistic ideas, discussion of art and images. You know, that's a very, very key part of the content here.
Well, I think we should explain that this podcast, I think, is a way of capitalizing on things that we've been talking about for many years about art and about the particular group that we're in with other based artists who are doing good work that we like to call New Art Secession.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we should explain a bit more about that.
Yeah,
or actually, explain why this podcast is called the Styles Podcast.
Yeah, so this name, Style, as in STILE, this is some kind of device that stops animals from escaping from a field, and it enables people to remove themselves from the field. When I first came up with this idea, it was a way of saying, well, we need to step outside of this flat field of featureless kind of aestheticism where everything's kind of a pretty picture that you put a like on and then you move on, and kind of actually elevate ourselves in some way to art that has some kind of meaning, you know, because nowadays it is more based on pure aestheticism, things that look pretty.
Exactly. And of course in Europe that's obviously more common, the styles, certain places in Europe, but that dot the landscape. And I think like it's really important because maybe I can only speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure I could speak for me, you, and the artists that we are friends with, in that nowadays there is an emphasis on quantity, the reign of quantity, getting yourself out there in terms of just becoming a like factory. And that's what a lot of artists, unfortunately, has just become like factories on Instagram or wherever.
I think it's this desire to, as you said, form sort of a bit more of a meaningful and close-knit bond with people who engage with art, people who consider themselves lovers of art, and remove ourselves from this very shallow, very wide field of just pure aestheticism.
And I think, it's true because even in the professional art world, you see certain artists that may have started off with this lightning of meaning and wanting to express themselves. Of course, like politics tends to degrade everything. It's like the universal solvent of art. But yet, as time goes on and it's sort of a mystique around that particular artist is cultivated, then their work just becomes fan service, or it just becomes a parody of what people expect of that artist.
It's creating art as well for an audience, I think, is something that I've been very conscious of recently, and I think everybody's. When you have social media, I think you start to become very self-conscious about who you're creating things for and whether they're pleased or not. But to come back to sort of who we are, I suppose. I mean, we both come from spheres that you could call a distant right spheres, I suppose. Although that's not really
Twitter.
Yeah, that's not really something that we would really like to involve in this podcast particularly, although it's inevitably, I think, going to sort of leak in.
It's always in the background, I think,
because that's the sort of the substrate in which we swim these days. The very fact that I'd like this to be on BitChute rather than on YouTube, and it is part of an underground. When you have this idea of this aesthetic secession, it's definitely the desire to remove oneself, I think, from the main sort of currents of art that we see today, and art as almost as an instrument of capitalism as well.
Yeah, that's inevitable. I think that capitalist realism has affected the art world, I think, even more severely than any. And so you have, a lot of the people that we're involved with do digital art, but it's the way that you do digital art. It's the way that you use these tools that I think sets us apart into actually like honoring what art as an ideal should be. Whereas a lot of people, they cultivate certain artworks that are either just fan service or that are just trying to serve a fetishistic niche. And again, that goes towards like your marketability, right? Because if you're doing like very pretty pictures of like, I don't know, anime characters that are doing certain indecent acts, then of course you're going to have a pretty huge following. But at the end of the day, I think you have to give yourself the freedom to actually explore territory that is either unorthodox or against the mainstream. And whether or not you're on the dissident right or on the left or whatever, I think that even like in such a politically saturated era that we live in, even transcending politics in itself is almost a revolutionary
That is
act.
a very revolutionary act, absolutely. And I think that art that's made well and art that has a story to it and isn't just made for some sort of, as a fetishistic commodity or as something that is designed to sort of drive home a point,
a propaganda vehicle, in other words.
A propagandistic sort of way. And even Jordan Peterson himself has made sort of points about this, saying, art, if it doesn't have a spiritual dimension, it's just propaganda. I'm not even trying to pretend.
It's very true.
I'm not even trying to pretend my art or art of people that I travel with has a particularly spiritual dimension, but I think it's definitely informed by a desire. For me personally, it's informed by a desire to sort of join this sort of grand stream of art as a story and as a narrative throughout, the centuries.
And I think even like a lot of art that we do in particular, and the people that we know, it is even using subject matter that is like quote unquote current or memeified or political, but yet it's taking that and making it into something more. It's like, yeah, okay, are you just drawing a picture of some e-girl, or is that e-girl an embodiment of the spirit of our age that you're trying to beautify through art? I mean, I know this sounds like totally
exactly. And it's going to sound pretentious. That's the thing. I'm fully prepared for us to actually, because I very much would like to sort of travel with this sincerity and actually say things honestly. But when they come out in this day and age and you digitize them and you put them on this format, inevitably you're kind of going to cringe at your own words and you're going to say, "Oh, this sounds kind of cheesy. What I'm trying to do here."
Yeah.
And talking about it is the only way that you can really kind of reify that. And otherwise, it just remains, it kind of simmers inside of you and it becomes something that's almost resentful in the end, where you just say, well, my work has so much meaning to it, but if only these plebs would understand.
I've been there, man. It's like...
but nowadays, you take the opposite direction. Sorry, but you have to take the completely opposite tack, and you have to actually explicitly, I think, explain to people the why your work has these images and what it's actually trying to say.
No, it's true. Like, that's totally a great point. And to be like more referential than I'm usually am, which is a lot. It's like, Heidegger said that, language is the house of being, but yet people like Adorno would say that language almost is like the great, people like Derrida would say that language is the great reifier of being, because now it's like you're placing words upon an ineffable thing.
Yeah,
but yet it's almost a necessity. It's like with the artist, the abstract landscape painter Brian Rudenberg said, an artist must be courageous enough to actually explain their work and not, take the route that's even more pretentious, which is like, well, if I leave it to mystery and I actually don't explain it, then it'll cultivate some sort of mystique, right?
That's right.
It's
that's
such
often
a throwback 90s thing,
yeah,
right?
That's a very selfish and materialistic kind of way, I think, to look at things. Because
it's like what I was going to say, like Francis Ford Coppola said in Filmmaker's Apocalypse. It's like, you want to make something that can appeal to people. He was talking about film, obviously, but it's like, oh man, I want to achieve this ideal, but yet I'm being pretentious. But then maybe you should, as an artist, allow yourself to, quote unquote, become pretentious in a lot of ways.
And I think having, a style and having aesthetic sense and, technical ability is very important. It's something obviously I put a lot of emphasis on in my work, but that to me is really only the tools or the grounding that I need in order to be able to tell an effective story. And I think that this is a big problem that people suffer from in the sort of the modern academic art world, or this revival of realism that's supposedly happening at the moment, like the sort of things that the Art Renewal Center salons promote. It's the sort of thing where technique kind of they believe that just pure technique is able to sort of blow away the cobwebs around this academic style, which for many good reasons was kind of pushed away and trampled on by modernism.
Yeah, I think, well, that's a great point you mentioned, because this really goes to explaining what our group of New Art Secession is trying to do. Because, like, me personally, I'm not the most technically proficient artist in the world. I'm trying to get better, obviously, and I still have somewhat of an inferiority complex. But, like, at the end of the day, I think people in our little group range from more impressionistic styles like me and other people, and we know people that have went to like legitimate ateliers and are legitimate artists in terms of realism and technique and skill. But yet in the contemporary art world, there's this sort of dichotomy that's building up where, you know, quote unquote normies, they don't get, quote unquote, don't get a lot of the sort of contemporary art stuff that is very conceptualist. And, you know, people say, well, you know, if you're going to go the conceptualist route, it means you don't have artistic skill. But yet you have the other extreme, which I think people don't really critique enough, which is the, you know, Art Renewal Center. If I just LARP 19th century classicism, and I am very technically proficient, but yet there's no spirit there. There's no narrative.
There needs to be the verve.
That's another corrosive. It's like photorealism. People that do photorealism of celebrities and flowers. I think that what we're trying to do is, like, sorry to ramble on, but what we're trying to do is sort of cut through that dichotomy and say you should allow yourself to embrace realism. At the same time, you should allow yourself to embrace the meaning that comes with various, you know, impressionistic and abstracted styles, right?
And I think that's absolutely 100% correct. But I think that this comes from having a grounding in art history as well, and understanding art as a continuum and art as a dialectic, and not just thinking, well, this is, you know, as we were so wrong about the fact that, you know, this is the end of history, we're also wrong about the fact this is the end of art, you know, and you can't make anything that's shocking anymore. You absolutely can make things that are shocking, but you also make things that are very beautiful, and you can even make things that are so beautiful that they are shocking, but it can't it can't just be one thing. It has to be the whole package, I think. And you've also, you know, art and graphic design and craft and even your digital art being an extension of craft in many ways. I think it needs to be integrated as well, because we've had all these wonderful movements in the early 20th century, or the late 19th century, where design, graphical styles, textiles, they were all integrated into, you know, what people used to consider the high arts, to the consternation of, you know, a lot of these sort of bourgeois high society, particularly people who were patrons of art, and they thought art should belong in these stuffy galleries, whereas people like William Morris, they had, you know, a genuinely socialistic attitude to it, that wonderful art should be available to everyone. And you have seen a massive, I think, democratization of art. You know, you can find anything that you want these days, really. You can find, if you have a taste, I think, in art, then you can find it. And I'd recognize that we're not, you know, we are not going to usurp any kind of art establishment. We're not going to become the new establishment or anything, and we're probably not even
want to.
But we're probably not even going to be, you know, as successful as the original Vienna Secession or anyone who I personally idolize. But we recognize that we're a product of our age, and we are very comfortable and very joyful, I think, to be living in this age.
Like I personally think that the democratization of art's a bad thing, but that's like a podcast in itself, right?
Yeah,
but I think you have to come to terms with it, right?
You do. And it's not just the democratization of art, it's just this pluralism that kind of is seeped into nearly every aspect of, like, Western world.
Definitely.
I was talking to you about Tom Rousseau talking about the concept of own space in the BAP book. This idea that there's no real unexplored boundaries, or that there's no little jungle that you can sort of slip into, that you feel like there's no eye of Big Brother on you anymore, and you're entirely
there's no more going native, there's no more Walter
yeah, that's right. Maybe this to me is kind of the equivalent of attempting in some way to go native in this in an artistic sense. but also
if anything,
respecting the traditions as well.
If anything, own space in the modern hyper-real digital world is almost delusion in that becoming hyper out there is a way of concealment, right?
Yes,
It's a way of becoming
absolutely.
imperceptible.
Yeah, it becomes so mundane at this point. I think that's how a lot of these artists who do have, 1 million followers or even 250,000 followers, they do in some ways, I think, feel invisible in that whatever they make is going to be adored and is going to receive a huge amount of adulation. But at the same time, then you only really have yourself to beat, I think, and you don't,
No, it's like how people feel lonely and isolated in cities with millions of people. It's the same effect.
Yeah, absolutely. We both have this desire, which is almost like a biting at ourselves, where we want to be seen and we want to be recognized, but we also want to displease people and cause a ruckus, I think. And that's very important.
I think, but your earlier point about how the Vienna secessionists, how they really, to me, what's really interesting and what we're trying to do with our group, I think, is that they broke with tradition to embrace an even more primordial and, dare I say, romanticized tradition that
100%.
embraces a polyvocality of art.
Yeah,
so
completely agree with that.
Yeah, so like the secessionists, they would do things like they would add textiles into their artwork, and how Gustav Klimt would use certain geometric symbols to symbolize a certain emotion or a state of being. And they would do things like they would have houses created that were aesthetically pleasing. And I think in our day and age, we have to sort of use the tools that we have within hyperreality, the memes, the technology, the digital interface, the seamless ability to share art, not just doing one thing, being a writer, an artist, a podcaster, being a whole litany of things that lend to a very fibrous, abstracted, polyvocal image of what an artist really is, and to just embrace it and go with it, and to say, maybe design and art should be together, maybe digital and traditional art should be blended, and not being afraid of just putting yourself in a box.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being an absolute stickler for tradition and saying that this is art, this is not art, you're never gonna make any headway with that sort of mindset. Right. I think these days, and this is where a lot of we always dab on Wignats and their opinions on art and their obsession with particular periods of 18th and 19th century sort of romanticism, and obviously art from the Third Reich, which I'm sure we'll do a talk in depth about that at some point.
Yeah.
But
no, it's true. I mean, there certainly is bad art. Like, let's not kid ourselves.
There's a lot of bad art. But then people would say these days, "Oh, you don't have to look at that. You can just look at art that you like," and that is very true.
Yeah, but that's not the point, because, see, I think there's an instinctual need within most people. And it may relate to the Thanatos impulse that that was the one thing that Freud was right.
That's what I was trying to. That's what I was trying to say. I definitely.
We love critique. We love critiquing things. We just love to destroy things. I mean,
I have a death drive. I definitely have a death drive.
Oh, exactly. Like me, I'm a total art critic. Like, I love art criticism, but my problem is that I try to find good things in artwork that traditionalists or Wignats would just find abhorrent. But yet it's maybe I should start writing about artworks that I hate. And every time I do, it's always been fire. Like, I did that film review of, oh God, what was that stupid movie? Paper Towns. Just when you hate watch something and when you express your hatred of something, it's almost like people love to see a demolition derby.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, hate watching and hate. I'm sure that on this talks we'll probably have a bit of hate viewing, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Looking at some piece of art and just absolutely ripping it to shreds. But there's, like you said, there are gems to be found even in areas where people have completely anathematized certain areas of art these days, and certain movements are seen as they're not kosher anymore. I personally think that realism, there's always going to be a place for realism and representing things as they're seen. And I think nowadays, especially, I've had this thought a lot recently, particularly looking at work from John Ruskin, him as a draftsman and as an observer of things. It's truly kind of exceptional today to actually look at something with such love and such care and such desire to kind of understand what this actually is as a physical thing, as a form, and nature as well.
My inner Clement Greenberg is like just breathing through his cigar with utter rage at this kitsch.
Yeah, absolutely. It's too sincere.
But the thing is, that's the thing with kitsch, and a lot of artists that like the odd nerdum cultists, they like actually call their artwork kitsch because
they do. Yeah.
There's an eternal quality to it. I think even Clement Greenberg would even agree that kitsch is ubiquitous. Kitsch will always be with us. Thomas Kincaid landscapes will all, being a landscape artist myself, it's like Thomas Kincaid and Norman Rockwell and Bob Ross is just like hanging over as hauntological ghosts, specters upon the art world, upon Instagram, just like hanging there in the aether.
I think it's because these things do say something, you know, that they're obviously speaking in some kind of perennial truth, because we do live, you know, in a world. We live in a physical world, and we live in a society. We live in a society where that society is also entrenched in a world that we actually have to understand through art. And the thing about you know all this constant kind of obsession, I think, with fantasy these days is really wearing a bit thin on a lot of people. Where
the Marvel universe.
It's also this kind of just obsession with this fantasy, you know, these harmless sort of pastel-y fantasy characters, and everybody has an OC, and everybody has, you know, their lesbian kind of slash fic, whatever you want to call it, with
the fan,
pop culture,
the erotic fanfic.
Yeah, and I mean, and this sort of thing, I've been thinking about this for a long time, that this doesn't really, to me, say anything particularly in this sort of in this dialectic of art. This is kind of something else entirely. And I think this is more kind of something that's emerged due to social media and the atomization of people in general, that this desire to kind of slip into a sparkly sort of fantasy world where everything is sort of dictated by you. These are very authoritarian worlds. You know, you shouldn't draw my OC in a way that I don't like it to be drawn. And that's fine.
Hello, where's her organs? Where's her organs? Yeah. My personal, like, I'm a super elitist. I'm like an Adorno level elitist when it comes to this. I think like you really can't consider a lot of that stuff quote unquote art because it's just culture industry trash. Like, I mean, the thing is, I forget who said it. I think it was either Campotter or Minoquan 4 who said that something like along the lines of like the Marvel universe is like the Iliad for Redditors. It's like the thing is, people find meaning in this stuff, even though I think after the Martin Scorsese Boomer meltdown, they really can't defend their stuff in terms of artistic merit, because come on, let's face it, this is like Hollywood, right? This is the pedo wood. So they have to just resort to what people like Marcuse said all along. And it's funny how like people on the right, they think that, you know, the Frankfurt School is like this horrible conspiracy theory where the Jews took over America or whatever. But really, like, what did Marcuse say? Now, I personally disagree with some of what he said in this one essay about art. I'm more of the Theodore Adorno school of there being high culture and low culture. But essentially what the Marvel people, the Redditors, what they're saying in defense of their, you know, culture industry trash is they're saying, well, you know, it makes people happy and comfortable. But what did Marcuse say in his famous essay about art and reification? He said, yeah, this type of art makes people comfortable, and that's a bad thing.
That is a very, very bad thing, incredibly bad.
It's very bad because it placates you. It's escapism in the purest form. And of course, you know, he said, well, it, you know, distracts you from the reality of capitalist exploitation and reification. You know, so
well, I'm inclined now to kind of, I suppose, agree with this as well.
No, that's true. You could argue about the specifics of what exactly it's ignoring you from. I mean, you know, the bread tubers, it's capitalism. The Wignats, it's the Jews. It's, you know, it's the 22 Zeta reptilian overlord.
It's the Rothschild Zionists.
It's the Rothschild Zionists. There you go.
I think that this does touch on an extremely fundamental point of why we're making this talk and why we're actually doing art in the first place. Is it's not to make people feel comfortable; it's to make people feel shook. You know, to use a South London term, I do want people to feel shook, but I also want people to feel like they're shook for a reason. You know, I don't want it to be pure.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Gross out factor or shock factor, whatever you want to call it.
I think like this is the problem with shocking art, is that people have like very edgy people have like abused shock value. Like things that were shock before they're promoted by the establishment. And I think
absolutely, and that then becomes the establishment in the end. And shock, I think you're right in that shock itself, the desire to outrage, you see this in nearly every strand of the media apparatus and this mass reproduction of images. You see this desire to shock and outrage as almost like a means of survival itself. That is their bread and butter. That's
their lifeblood.
Yeah.
If you can. And the thing is, if you can convince people of certain things without getting too political, then you just have to keep finding things that become more shocking. And then all of a sudden, to quote Vampire King Julius Evola, my belief is only that everything before the 19th century was considered sane and normal by most people. It's like those things are now revolutionary and shocking.
Yeah.
And even though... But yet they aren't in the same way, because I really don't want to our project to devolve into like the Paul Joseph Watson.
No, absolutely. And I don't think it's in danger. I don't think it's ever in danger of this, because I recognise that to go back to what you were saying about Evola, where he said Evola was convinced that everything was an involution, and this was a descent, a constant and inexorable descent away from some idealised beginning, and everything was kind of just this tumbling down and this constant kind of falling away of the essence, the core essence of everything. We have this amnesia as a species and as a race.
Cultural amnesia.
We forget everything that, and then we try and reproduce this and have these sort of flourishings and these renaissances or whatever, but it's never quite how it was. And you're basically trying to reproduce, I think this is Adorno, isn't it? To reproduce this image again and again and again, you lose the aura of this original image.
Oh, that's Benjamin.
That's right. Sorry, my postmodernism is going to be tested in this series of talks we're having.
No, but it's true. I mean, even people that it's funny how things are so of a certain way, like living under woke neoliberalism, that even people who are like 60s radical hippies, like Graham Hancock, are considered like possessing quote unquote reactionary ideas. Because that's a reference to his work, because he calls it a form of cultural amnesia, that there was this more ancient, greater civilization than us that got totally forgotten by the sands of time. And it's like, wow, that's like Julius Evola.
It is. It's a Hyperborean sort of thesis there. But I mean, these things.
My personal belief is that hippies could easily be converted into right wingers. It's just you have to disconnect them from like modern woke.
I think if you give a hippie enough LSD, you can make him believe anything, honestly. And even that. Well, I think a lot of them despise neoliberalism and their sort of establishment anyway. But
but that's besides. But that's another topic.
To come back to it's definitely
art
important.
Alienation.
I think to make art that makes people feel like something in them has been kind of dislodged. I think is something important for both you and me, and for a lot of people that we know.
Yeah. Like even the postmodernists, he's not a postmodernist, but even people like Gregor Bataille would say that, if you read his work on eroticism, which I highly recommend to everyone, true transgression, true subversive transgression in art isn't like cheap and easy and like, oh wow, look at this nun doing a lewd act. It's
look at this crucifix in a bottle of piss.
Yeah, well, no, but this is the thing about Piss Christ. This is what I'm getting at, because I highly recommend everyone go to my blog and go to my Modern Art Madness. Not to do a shameless plug.
No, shameless plug. This is the place where we do shameless plugs.
Yeah, I know, eh? Go to Geo's Content Corner, my blog spot on WordPress, because I'm a WordPress guy.
Like, comment, subscribe.
I'm like, comment, subscribe, shit posting reactionary WordPress blog. Go and look up my sister Wendy's take on Piss Christ.
Yeah.
The thing is with true transgression is it has to really cling at you on a metaphysical level. And I think that Piss Christ, even though like people think it was edgy and shameless and crass, and even Fear Factory wrote a song about it, about religion, man. I think that Piss Christ was because Romero was actually Roman Catholic himself. I mean, he is, and in his mind, it wasn't. It was a deeper transgression. It was a way of showing, essentially, not to give my article. I still highly recommend reading my article, but to give it away, he said that it was a way of honoring Christ because this is what modernity has done to Christ.
Yeah.
And Sister Wendy saw that.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, most people think it was just like, oh man, this is so edgy. He's putting like, a figurine.
With all good conceptual artists, and I mean, we were talking about Mark Quinn earlier as well.
Yeah, and Damien Hirst. Yeah.
There's the outer surface of the work, which often can cause people to be outraged and feel a certain sense of disquiet and discomfort. And then there's actually, you listen to the artist and their own ideas about this, and you realize that a lot of your disquiet was actually caused by your own kind of preconceptions of what this image really did to you before you even knew what he thought about it or what his intentions were. And obviously the best conceptual artists understand that there's a fine line between making something they know is going to outrage and know that's it's going to cause all kinds of speculation and talk and everything. They don't want to give too much of it away. But nowadays I feel like it is kind of it actually is more radical to genuinely give everything away and actually explain like what your work means, especially when you're making figurative work, and especially when you're making work which is actually kind of got allegorical and religious sort of connotations or components
and
to
symbolic.
Yeah, that's right. And symbolism as a sort of an art movement is something we'll be covering over here definitely as well.
The symbolist movement and how their form of symbolism wasn't as direct as the Renaissance. It had a bit of ambiguity to it.
Yeah.
And I think like nowadays, like you almost have to explain your artwork because the modern hyper-real situation we find ourselves, its currency is on one end ambiguity in itself, but on the other end is just like this pervasive, like all-powerful latency where you have to explain things in a soundbite or in a really quick snappy meme.
Yeah, otherwise you're in danger of transgressing some kind of unspoken law or offending the wrong person or something like that. But
even shock and transgression is relative. Like, I hate to say this, because it's like I have to maintain a front of being this trad reactionary, but transgression.
Kind of any of that cultural relativism.
It's all relativism. I think that even transgression is like relative in a sense to, not to use that bugaboo word, but it's true. It's like what
I completely agree. Completely agree.
Like people that still think.
Well, the lobster telephone is not shocking to people these days. It's just kind of quirky and as Clement Greenberg would call it, kitsch probably.
Well, no, that's the thing. The lobster telephone became kitsch.
But at the time, it was alarming to a lot of people, as the same as the fountain of
Duchamp.
Yeah, exactly.
Marcel Duchamp.
And nowadays, that's considered to be kind of like, it's. I don't even think that people really have the kind of the symbolic language to really even understand what he was saying with that, because at the time people knew exactly what he was saying with that. He was saying, fuck this kind of bourgeois idea that you need to go into a gallery and see this masterpiece all painted smoothly and everything. This is art. I literally piss in it.
But he's the only one that could do it, because even nowadays that idea, oh my God, I just despise, this term because of people like Banksy. Even that becomes in itself mainstream and kitsch to say, fuck the art world, here's a urinal. Like, even that became.
Well, in the end, saying "fuck the art world" kind of became the art world. I think that was sort of what new British artists or young British artists sort of thing was about, really. When they
the YBA was like all about that. Like,
and then they became, inevitably they became the art world themselves.
Like nowadays, I'm pretty sure certain galleries, they have gift shops with like a figurine of the urinal. Like,
a figurine.
There's fancy Walmart prints. Come on now. we could do a whole like I wanted to actually write a piece, but we can even do a whole podcast just destroying Banks.
Banksy is tremendously interesting to me. I don't know if I want to destroy him, but I definitely would like to sort of re-examine his pictures, or I don't know if they're even really pictures, his designs in the light of his sort of mass mechanical reproduction and his own kind of, I don't know, this has kind of been his doom, really.
I'm pretty sure there's been some graduate in some MFA program somewhere that has written a thesis about Banksy in relation to art in the age of mechanical reproduction.
Yeah, God.
Yeah, that's like me and Alex Gray, man. It's like when Luke Rudowski questioned Alex Gray about the Obama portrait, and it's like his wife stepped in, you know.
What, Alex Gray made an Obama picture?
Yeah, he made an Obama picture that was like,
oh gee, oh god, I've seen this. Oh, I've seen this. I thought this was
on his head.
This is bizarre.
I think Alex Jones said this was like demonic DMT, like the reptilian elite takes DMT stuff. You know,
this is honestly bizarre to me because I actually thought that this was a parody or a
parody of Alex Gray.
Yeah, I didn't think Alex Gray himself actually painted this, but.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that's terrible. I'm sorry, Alex Gray. You shouldn't have done that.
You know what's funny is that Luke Rudowski actually asked him, the guy from We Are Change, actually asked him, he's like, why don't you destroy it, considering like he like pours white phosphorus on children.
Yeah.
And like he didn't say anything. His wife just comes in, is like, well, you know, we're like California hippies, like liberals, and it's like we love, you know, change and hope, and it's wow, man.
Yeah, I've actually brought up here. There's a picture of Luke Rudowski actually shoving a microphone in Alex Gray's wife's face here.
Yeah. It's funny because Neil Haig actually tears Alex Gray apart pretty viciously. Not viciously, but like it's sort of implied. I think Neil Haig is like the more woke Alex Gray in my opinion.
We'll have a talk about visionary art and
oh yeah, man, like that's
discuss visionary art because I think we both do come from a background of being very inspired by visionary artists. Yeah, not just appreciating, but also being directly, in my case at least, directly influenced by visionary art. Because I mean, I remember seeing H.R. Geiger's work, you know, before I really even saw like Klimt or something like that. I was reading books by Geiger when I was like 10 years old. I probably shouldn't have been looking at that sort of thing at that age. And Frazetta as well. So I mean, I do come from a fantasy and surrealist, I suppose, what you call it, visionary art background, concept art background, where I'm very aware of these movements in art and these, you know, the purposes of these different types of art.
But you know what's funny is that your work is more narrative based, and that comes from that influence of that spectrum of visionary art. I come from more of like the nebulous like neo-hippie version, like could you say neo-hippie undercurrent of visionary art. Like I always, you know, people like yeah, I'll admit it, Alex Gray, Robert Venosa.
I'm a big fan of Robert Venosa as well, and I mean I think
Biskinsky.
Yeah.
Jedzala, yeah. Like I remember discovering Bikinski when I was like really young. I was like, this must have been around like 2007, and just being like mortified by these weird entities, right? And me, I never really got into the narrative aspect of it in some ways. Like I don't even read a lot of like fiction, you know. But whereas like you come from like the way you not reproduce, but the way you edit the world that you see around you in your work is very narrative driven. I love that, you know. I always wanted that ability.
Well, that's me. I mean, obviously nowadays people probably know me more as a portrait artist or somebody who draws, you know, I essentially just copy pictures of people, but I try and kind of imbue them with something of a verve or a bit more life. Yeah, and that's based on absorbing a lot of the sort of the qualities of the person and empathizing with the person, even if they do have extreme positions or if they're the kind of persona non grata in today's world. And that I said this a long time ago to someone. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, that's all right.
Like about my personal take on what I do, and I think this is applicable to you as well, and the people that we're friends with, is that a lot of people will just, you know, look at certain images and say, well, you know, you're just a meme artist or whatever, you're a propagandist. But at the end of the day, I think my mission, at least, is to take these images that speak to people in our unique epoch and just sort of lift them out of impermanence, because meme art ultimately is
that idea of sorry, is lifting something out of impermanence is something I think about tremendously. I think about that probably way too much, about how this art is going to be perceived. You know, a lot of this art that we see today, how this is going to be perceived even in 5 years from now, you know, let alone in 100 years from now, like the sort of the art that we look at. I mean, Gustav Klimt is 100 years since he died last year, and that's why I went to see the exhibition of him and Egon Schiele's drawings. And it's 100 in 100 years, the impact of these pieces has not been dulled one bit.
They're diminished.
No, that they actually have massively increased in their power. And I don't know if you can even say you can't say the same for a lot of these pieces that were created last year. You know, I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of these. You talk about meme art. You know, these images where they made portraits of people from Gamergate, for example. It's the immediacy of making it, the immediacy of getting that dopamine hit and actually saying, look, my art has become viral because it was very topical. I suppose I'd almost compare these to maybe even political cartoons in the 19th century or something, or people making these, you know, commenting on world affairs, because these things stand on their own as competent drawings and things these days. I suppose that's a bit more close to that.
My personal opinion is that when you look at political cartoons from the 18th or 19th century, you can appreciate the aesthetic quality to them. But as time went on, as the culture industry sort of sunk its claws into the psyche of man, political cartoons have been, I think, are the first victim of the culture industry, even more than film. Like I think political cartoons, they have artistic skill, some of them, unless you're Matt Boers and you just create these hideous images, right? But
coming back to this idea of permanence as well, because I think that's something we should touch on absolutely, is making art with the future in mind.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we do suffer from this loss.
Hyperpolitical art has no future in mind. It has
it has no future whatsoever. Just as politics doesn't have, or at least democratic politics doesn't have any future in mind at all, other than a potential doom future, which these strange death cults sort of environmentalists seem to be focusing on at the moment.
Yeah, the literal trash world.
But taking an image or taking something of today is something that, you know, I'm very much intent on. You know, you've got to extract things from the now. You know, I think harkening back to sort of an idealized medieval past, or even something that's sort of a creation of pure fantasy, that to me doesn't really have any future either, at least not for the stuff I'd like to do. So you have to draw upon things that, you know, because they have life to you. They a lot of my art kind of stems from empathy for people who you see them through a screen, or you see them in real life, or you see them, you know, you feel for them, and you feel like, you know, they're part of this strange game we're all playing, and that has to be the substance by which you construct your art these days, I think.
Hyperpolitical works, they're ephemeral, but whereas memes, I think the beauty of memes is that they are ephemeral and they change and they become polyvocal. But when it comes to like the stuff that we're doing, like, to me, what really struck me was one of your pieces you did recently about what is his real name? Bagel guy? Bagel man? Yeah, the manlet, Bagel manlet. Like, to me, I think he's, like, people were trashing him, but he's an inherently sympathetic character because I think he's a victim of modernity. And you did his portrait. I wonder if he saw it. That'd be pretty crazy. And I think, like,
Chris Morgan.
That
was on the end of my brain. A
lot of these people have an inherent power because the internet has allowed crazy people to exist on a wider platform. And I think,
but at the same time, sorry to interject here, but at the same time that this kind of strips the fact that they exist on this platform and this global platform, it does strip away a lot of their humanity, and it does strip. They become a caricature, really, and that's something with my art. I'd like to kind of, when I do portrait work, at least, I'd like to rehumanize them and show that, you know, there's a person there, even particularly behind people who are depicted as in some way morally defunct or monstrous or, you know, controversial, to say the least. And this brings us to this. I would like to show this the Lucas works here.
Like, that's the thing. The memes have a potential to totally dehumanize people, but dehumanization, it's a negative, but yet in some ways it can become dehumanization for the purpose of making them more than human or greater than just average humanity. Like,
that's why we have I suppose it is an archetypal representation when you memify somebody, or I don't know if that's a...
When you memify someone, you become part of a hyperstitional digital transference of the image into something that's larger than life, to become, to put a totally pretentious label on it.
Well, no,
it's like Lucas. It's like Lucas is like the ninth circle of hell for the internet.
So a lot of people
when you go to Lucas's room, you can't escape. It's there's this aura of mystique, and I mentioned this to Justin Murphy when I did his podcast. It's like the internet has become this hyperstitional metaphysical entity that can just transform the image of someone into a greater than human level. It dehumanizes them, and at the same time makes them into something, to quote Cape Fear, I was in a place with subhumans, I became more than human.
And this is completely separate from them as a person as well. And I think that they even begin to lose kind of connection with this hyperstitional image of themselves. Right.
And I'm pretty sure that when you actually take the time to, if you can, to actually go and talk to these people, then this sort of mystique, I don't think it wears off, but I think a lot of them, like, I'm thinking of Sam Hyde here. I think he's kind of aware of his mystique. And when you sort of strip through the layers of certain, quote unquote memeified people, that a lot of them, I notice, maybe they're not aware of the mystique, or they can't be aware of the mystique. Like, of course, the archetype of this would be Chris Chan, in that, no way would he ever be aware to the full extent of how much he transformed the internet.
And that makes him, Chris Chan, again, is another very kind of interesting subject for art, because he does say more than simply, oh, this is an autistic man who was, taken advantage of or played for laughs. Yeah, he is something greater, far greater than the sum of his parts, I suppose you could say.
Oh yeah.
And it's the same as this. I think on a bit of a small scale, this whole Lucas thing, just because it is, you can see these two here on the screen. It is a revolting idea, it's a revolting story, but you don't need to necessarily know the story, I think, to find both the original screenshot has a kind of a very unnerving quality to it, and also any art, because there's been compilations made of people's art reacting to this this horrible revelation, I suppose you could call it. It's you get this feeling that you're seeing something that should not be seen. It's absolutely cosmic horror, except it's the horror of the cosmos of the internet, the meme cosmos.
The response that I got when I did that drawing, someone edited the background, but I remember one friend of mine who was in a DM group, he said, "Wow, I can't believe your drawing of Lucas. You've almost managed to humanize him." And I remember thinking about that, because I'm not going to lie, when I started drawing Lucas, I'm like, oh man, this is a hot meme. I'm going to get likes. It's going to lift him up into impermanence.
That was my mindset. That was my mindset on it. My take on it as well. Absolutely.
It'll lift him out of impermanence. But really, I personally don't agree with what he did. But at the same time, I do find it interesting that people say that, your artwork humanized him. That it has that power. And, I'm not particularly, let's face it, it's not a very technically good drawing, obviously. But, I'm consciously aware of the fact I'm trying to lower myself to not appear pretentious, right?
Well, a drawing is a drawing, and again, this whole idea of, the ideas behind the art being expounded is the point of really why we're doing these talks, after all. I make drawings which I don't consider to be good either. And I do quite like this drawing I've done of Lucas as well, which is also displayed here. But
Oh,
I've
it's amazing.
I've
Yeah,
taken a
yours.
conscious decision. I've taken this conscious decision. I don't know why, to obscure his face and to kind of destroy his face, because I did originally have his face on there, and usually I do include the face. The face is the most important thing because I draw a lot of
Right.
portraits recently. But for this one, I've decided to destroy the face and kind of annihilate it and turn it into this ghostly grey mess.
But you know what's funny about that is you've destroyed his face. It's very like, you know, if you read that one chapter in 1,000 Plateaus about his chapter on faciality, he talks about how the moving parts of the face become, you know, rearranged and becomes horrific because the eyes and the black holes of the face, meaning like the different parts that you project upon a face, how they become distorted. And he was, of course, referring to Francis Bacon.
Yeah.
But even in Lucas, the fact that you've consciously obscured the face, it's almost like he's been reduced to nothing but this horrific faceless body, this cantankerous mass of flesh that is projecting upon the screen, and his face no longer is a face. It's this gaze into the abyss that is his room. Like literally his face in your drawing, in your digital render, has, you know, it's melting into the room itself. There no longer is Lucas the person. There is Lucas the room. A little deep lore here. I used to test drawing faces. I could never draw the human face. So I used to do these paintings of faceless people, and I used to hide it by like, oh, well, this is actually obscure and it's deep. They have no face, right? But really it's just to compensate from, I mean, of course there's a meaning to it, but really it's just to compensate for the fact that I can't, you know, draw faces for shit. But recently I've been getting into actual portraiture because you've inspired. Like, just you gotta do it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, making drawings you consider to be a failure, I think, is a it's probably the most important part of drawing. And
it's almost like sounds kind of crazy, but it's like you're channeling a bit of the energy of my earlier.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
I totally ignore the face. Maybe we should save the other pieces for another.
Yeah,
episode.
I think we probably should.
Next episode, we're going to probably talk about the pieces that of our artwork that we shared together, and maybe a few more.
There'll definitely be, I think, structure-wise, I would actually like to have art that we've done and people that we know have done on screen and discussed for at least kind of half the content. But we also would like to discuss other works and art history and the context and things.
And then we'll have like specific episodes of certain periods and certain, even just like a singular artist.
Yeah,
like
and I might have to do the scary act of like reading a whole book all the way through. And even though I know you greatly
we're gonna do the Symbolist one.
We're gonna do the Symbolists by Edward Lucy Smith.
And then maybe we'll do that Mark Quinn one and Damien Hirst.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
I would love to talk about Mark Quinn. And this was a BitChute exclusive only, so we're not going to have this on YouTube because YouTube is stinky.
We're not going to let certain you-know-whos control our content.
You know who tube. No. So
Reptilian tube.
We'll see you next time, and I hope this has been at least marginally enjoyable. I certainly enjoyed myself.
Goodbye.
Farewell.